Welcome back. Egypt was a guest of honor at the International Imports Exhibition that was held in Shanghai in China and was inaugurated by the Chinese President Xi Jinping, and of course His Excellency Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli attended this important event. And on that particular topic, we're going to be shedding light in our first segment. We're very delighted to be having with us Dr. Hany Abou-el-Fotouh, our economic expert. Good morning, Dr. Abou-el-Fotouh.
A very good morning to you, sir. And when we are speaking about China, China has shown interest in Africa for years. And Egypt can be the gate of to Africa, not only to China, but to the whole world. But with the participation of Egypt into this expo, with the participation of more than 260 companies and with a high-ranking delegation headed by Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli, we are saying this practically on the ground. How do you see the amount of companies which participated in the expo, and what should be our agenda in the coming period?
Well, the expo was a very good chance for the Egyptian exhibitors to promote the services and goods of Egypt into this huge market. The Egyptian pavilion presented nearly 38 companies in the field of textile, communication, and garments. And as I said, it is a very huge market, and we can explore the needs and expectations of the Chinese market and meet the expectations with sellable products and services to meet the needs of the huge market in China. And I expect in future that the Egyptian companies will avail this opportunity, the good ties, economic ties and trade ties between Egypt and China and the bilateral relations to extend the services and products that are required in the Chinese market.
Right. Of course, Egypt participating in such an event would add to the experiences of the Egyptian market. How important is the participation of the Egyptian side in events like that or expos like that in giving Egypt the ability to be catching up with what's happening inside the international market and the competition and upgrading the quality and finding differences or sorting out differences and, you know, elements like that?
In fact, Egypt has signed several bilateral agreements, trade agreements with different countries, and the presence of Egypt in these exhibitions are much needed because the bilateral agreements would facilitate the free float and the exchange of goods and services between the countries. Egypt is taking a very progressive action in presenting itself in the trade field and in promoting what could be invested in Egypt, what could be exported from Egypt. So I see it as a very positive step that we need to be seen more progressively and proactively in such events.
And we cannot separate politics from economy with the many visits of President Abou-el-Fotouh Sisi to China and his meetings with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping and with also the Chinese Prime Minister and many of the CEOs of high-ranking companies in all fields. I think that this has also had its impact, if you agree with me.
Certainly. I definitely agree with you. This visit, the recent visit of President Abou-el-Fotouh Sisi to China, it is the fourth or fifth visit since his taking presidency in Egypt, and last month he was presenting at the FOCAC summit, and at that event Egypt had signed $18 billion agreements in different fields, particularly in the field of construction and communication, transportation.
And tourism.
And tourism, definitely. Tourism is still a green field in the Chinese front, because we receive only something like 300 Chinese tourists a year, while in fact there are 140 million tourists, Chinese tourists visiting or touring around the world. So our share in the tourism field is still very, very little. And we aspire that the coming years would witness more tourists from China.
How can that, or incidents or events like that, help in attracting more Chinese tourists, especially that we know the type and style of the Chinese market and the requirements for a Chinese tourist and a Chinese citizen? How can such events help tighten the bond and empower the Chinese tourism inside Egypt?
The expo, which Egypt was present this week, demonstrated several aspects apart from the trade aspect. It demonstrated also the tourism in Egypt, and as I mentioned, China is a very huge market, and the expectations to attract Chinese tourists to Egypt should be very high in the coming years. The Chinese tourist, I believe that he is more interested in the cultural side of Egypt, and that was, I believe, that was very well presented in the last expo.
Yes, sir. And as you've kindly mentioned, the participation of President Abou-el-Fotouh al-Sisi in the summit of FOCAC, which was tackling the cooperation between China and Africa. This is coming in a very specific timing, as in less than 2 months, Egypt is going to be the president of the African Union. And we are, for long, by the way, studying our vision and trying to introduce our vision regarding this and regarding what we are going to introduce to the Black continent during the presidency of Egypt to the EU. How do you see this timing, and how do you see what we can do? It's our homework, it's our agenda, and the preparations and procedures to be taken to pave the way for more Chinese investment in Africa through Egypt.
Egypt is a gate of Africa, and due to its strategic locations and the taking advantage of the Belt and Road initiative, Egypt would highlight its position as a leading or as a strategic area in the continent, in the Black continent. Particularly, China would benefit from the strategic location of Egypt, since it had already signed several trade agreements, free trade agreements with different countries. So Egypt being a strategic location, this would definitely be an opportunity for the flow of trade between China and different parts in the African continent, and due to its location, the transportation, the transshipment, definitely Egypt would present many benefits in this regard.
Right. Since mentioning the Belt and Road Initiative that was launched by the Chinese President Xi Jinping, if you'd like to elaborate more extensively over this initiative to the viewers.
The Belt and Road Initiative was launched in year 2013, if my memory serves me right, and it centers around the trade and between the different countries. The roads, what they call the Silk Road, is the trade roads which facilitates trade between different parts of the continents. So the Belt and Road actually is the trade initiative with the different countries in the world, and the exchange of trade would boost the wealth of the individual countries. So each country which takes part in this initiative would aspire to make profit and benefit from having the trade agreements and shipments and exchange of trade done through or executed through these agreements.
Sir, the Egyptian-Chinese relations reached the level of strategic partnership. And this required a lot of work, a lot of efforts exerted from both sides. But let's have the reflection or what happened on the ground regarding this. For example, let's mention the Chinese industrial zone in the new axis of the new Suez Canal. How do you see this as another example or another model of bilateral cooperation?
The Egypt-China bilateral agreements and bond is becoming very strong. Due to its strategic location, the Suez Canal, highlighted the Suez Canal, China would benefit from the strategic location of Egypt and extend the trade and transshipments through this area. And as you mentioned, the Chinese zone alongside the Suez Canal, it's a very good opportunity for both sides to achieve their objectives. We will benefit from the input of the Chinese trade and transshipments and design of ports, and definitely
marine industry in general.
The maritime industry.
The maritime industry.
The maritime industry in general, yes, would be the hub of this cooperation.
Inshallah.
Last Monday, the Central Bank of Egypt announced that the foreign reserves have reached $44.501 billion by the end of October 2018. So what does that increase mean over the economic level to us?
This increase means that the monetary policy along with the economic reform program are progressing very well. The level of foreign exchange reserve is at $44.5 billion, which actually is far beyond the standard level, which suffice for 3 months importation of goods and services. Actually, we have now what is equivalent to 8 months sufficing the needs for imports of goods and services. I think this is very good, and we are far above the standard level. There are 3 options to utilize this surplus, actually, by establishing a sovereign fund, wealth fund, and could yield high returns on the reserve, or alternatively, Egypt could use this surplus fund for early repayment of its debts, and by that reducing the debt burden on Egypt. So I believe that this success has come in a very timely needed, and I'm proud that this success is being witnessed now.
The timing. The word timing here, I think it's very important, and I don't know if we should mention that regarding China. In any relation, any foreign relation between Egypt and any other country, we are working for the best interest of the two. I mean, the two sides should benefit from this relation or these ties. And in specific China these days, we are not going to ignore that they are suffering economically because of the US-China trade war. And with the tariffs imposed by the American president, by Donald Trump, on steel, aluminum, and you name it. And it seems that this is going to continue at least for the coming period. How we can benefit from this? Because I think that whenever there are problems with other nations, maybe this is for the best interest of others. Maybe the Chinese are going to seek to open new markets in other places or with other countries rather than the biggest economy in the world, rather than the US. I don't know if this is applicable or things which can be really met on the ground.
Well, as rightfully said, China is seeking to diversify its exports destination to different countries instead of relying on the huge US market. The strong relations between Egypt and China would definitely be a good point in favor of China to explore whether its exports to markets like Egypt would still grow further. The trade, the importation from China during this year until August stands at $6.5 billion. And while the exportation from Egypt to China is still very little, it's around $256 million. So yes, the timing is important for both. Both countries should avail or use the opportunities for the benefits of the two nations.
Recently, Her Excellency Dr. Hany Said, the Minister of Planning, have said that the growth rate in Egypt have reached 5.3% of. So we need to know what does that mean and how is it going to be implicating progress over, all in all, thoroughly over the economic status in Egypt.
The growth rate is for in the first quarter of this year stands at 5.3%, while it is expected to reach 5.8%. Okay, and I think that this goes very well with the progress achieved in the economic reform program started a couple of years ago. There are several sectors which contributed to this growth, primarily Suez Canal, construction, and gas. We would hope that other economic sectors would present themselves more tangibly in this growth. I think that as President Al-Sisi gave his directives a few months ago that the growth rate should reach at least 7%. This is not an easy target. It is challenging, but it's not impossible. And I hope that the coming year would witness some progress in the other economic sectors to present more contribution to the growth rate.
And also, sir, there are many announcements said by even just 24 hours ago by Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli and Minister of Investment Dr. Saha Nasser regarding paving the way for investors and to try to eliminate all the obstacles in front of investors, whether, by the way, from inside or outside Egypt, to come and to invest in Egypt in different fields. How do you see, sir, these statements? And how do you see also the procedures implemented on the ground, to the extent that many of the economic international entities are praising the Egyptian economic reform and also taking Egypt as a model? And last but not least, the IMF said so, and they already announced that the last tranche of the loan, the $2 billion are going to be given to Egypt in the coming few days.
Well, I see that the statements truly reflect the strategic directives and aspiration of the country, the directives which we all would hope to be achieved, that investment, foreign direct investment should be more in Egypt. Despite globally the FDI, the foreign direct investment, decreased by significantly, and at least by 40%. Egypt still, during the first quarter of this year, witnessing an increase in the foreign direct investment, despite it is less than expected. Okay, because of the problems in the emerging markets. Egypt, I think the Ministry of Investment has done reasonable achievements in tackling the obstacles, for example, by releasing the new investment law, and this, in fact, was very much needed. It came in the right time to pave the way for more investments and tackle the problems faced by the local investments and the investors and the foreign investors. Still, much has to be done yet, but the road or the long journey just started, and I hope that we would continue.
And better late than never.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Talking about the Chinese market, which is one of the biggest and most influential markets, booming worldwide. There are measures, I mean, communicating and catching up with the latest with markets like the Chinese market and the American and the European and all that. The Chinese is the most booming. What measures should the Egyptian market be taking in order to compete minute by minute with markets like the Chinese market and be able to host Chinese products in a different way other than before?
In fact, we cannot compete.
We can. There is always a hope.
There is always a hope, but
you mean the quality? Egyptian quality is far more better.
That we import more from China, and as I said earlier, the importation from China stands at $6.5 billion in this year, and the exports just 256 million. Indeed, we can do better in order to adjust the deficit in the balance of trade between Egypt and China. That's why Egypt has taken part in the expo this week, presenting 38 companies. What is needed is to study the huge market, Chinese market, and see what are needed, what are the expectations of the Chinese people and Chinese importers, and try to come up with products that meet these expectations.
Right. When you talked about the element of we be unable to compete with the Chinese market because most of the countries worldwide won't be able to compete with the Chinese market, but there are some elements that any other market could compete with the Chinese market, like the quality, like some few elements that we could take it on our side. Could that be possible, or I mean, any other country can be competing with the Chinese market in general?
Of course, any country has a competitive edge in one side or another. For example, if the China, it's just a rough example, if we are talking about the handicrafts, okay?
Exactly.
Okay. We have some unique unique goods which can be exported to China, but it all depends how competitive are our goods vis-a-vis other countries which also export to China in terms of quality and terms of taste, the consumer taste, and in terms of price. This is very challenging and needs thorough studies by the exporters in Egypt, and try to see how well we can use our capabilities, unique capabilities, to promote our exports to this huge market.
Sir, we should see the opportunity, since we do have an economic expert to speak about, for me, I don't know if I can consider what I'm going to speak about as rumors or media reports. From time to time, we hear that all the deals between Egypt and China are going to be in yuan or with the Egyptian pound. And this is going to be for the best interest of both nations. And right after that, no, it didn't work. Why we do involve the currency into such deals? And if this can be implemented on the ground, why we do not do so?
It's a very complicated matter indeed. A couple of years ago, the Central Bank of Egypt has reached an agreement with China for the exchange, the currency of the settlement of goods and services between Egypt and China. And I think I'm not fully aware about the progress of this initiative.
Then it was not a rumor.
No, it wasn't a rumor. The deal was signed. The agreement was signed, I think, 2 years ago. And I'm not fully aware about the progress in this deal. But generally speaking, assuming that it had worked, this would be very good, because the settlement of imports and exports between the two countries originally use the US dollars or other foreign currency to settle these deals. But if we used the Chinese yuan, it would make less pressure on the exchange rate, US dollar EGP exchange rate, because as Egypt importation from China is still very high, and if this could be, if we use the Chinese currency to settle the importation, the value of importation, this would actually make less pressure on the US dollar EGP exchange rate.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, it has, the deal or the agreement has very good sides, very good sides of, and we...
For both, by the way?
Yes, definitely for both.
Right, Dr. Hany Abou-el-Fotouh, the economic expert, would like to thank you very much for coming in. May you have a very good day.
Right, after the short break, we are going to be back with more in a special episode of our breakfast show, so stay tuned only on Hany TV International.